Okay, I'm Gary Wallace, and I'm a realtor now going on, I have to think of this actually, 42 years. And yeah, they actually made me emeritus last year, which just simply means I don't have to pay dues except to this association. So there is an advantage if you can last that long. Like I say, I'm with Santa Fe Properties. During the course of the session, since it gets confusing when people hold the questions to the end, you're welcome to raise your hand and ask me what you need to ask, because then we'll be on the topic. Some of the things I can't go into in big detail, and that's only because of time restraints. It's not that they're less important, but some of them you probably wouldn't use as much, such as the IDX explanations and virtual office websites. If you go online, you can just simply read it, and usually it's more useful for qualifying brokers. Are there any qualifying brokers here today? 3? Okay, well, you have to go online and read it. So that's why I don't go into detail, because there's too many other things to go into. So we're going to start, and at this point, usually people say, well, what page are we on? That's not going to help you today, but that might work out even better. So what is the MLS? It actually disseminates the information of what listings are on the market. It offers a blanket offer of compensation, and we are going to talk more about that, because that's one of the more important parts that you should be aware of. Encourages cooperation among the participants. It disseminates the information about the listings and the properties that you're going to be selling or are selling. And it also gives databases and the information back about who's doing what and what's going on, and all of you can go in there too if you're that interested. I've never done it. I know people that like to go in and see how many closings this broker had or that. You can do it, but yes, by nature, I'm just not that nosy and I don't care. But some people, it's important for them to see what's going on, and the MLS will do that for you. There's really 3 general types of listings, and one is exclusive right to sell. Exclusive right to sell simply means you have a contract, and only you can sell that property and, of course, get compensated. The seller, if he does sell it and say, oh, I just sold it to my sister, you would still get paid. He can't deny you and say, well, but I sold it myself. That would be an exclusive agency, where the agency is exclusive, but the seller does reserve the right, in most instances, to sell that property if they so desire to do so. And one other one is the open listing, which I always say is not really a listing. Some people call them pocket listings, but they still have to be in writing, because without a signed listing agreement, even if the seller says, you bring me a buyer, I'll sell you that property, it's not enforceable because it needs to be in writing, unless the seller decides to say, oh, I'm still going to pay you, don't worry, and they do, then it's fine, then it's a contract. But always get anything in writing that you can to make sure you get paid, and of course specify the compensation and have a beginning date and an end date. I know commercial brokers have self-renewing contracts quite often. In residential, usually they have an end date. And as I said, pocket listings, we all know listings that somebody says, well, I'm kind of thinking of selling my property. I'd like to get $750 for the property, and if you bring me somebody, I'll sell it, But sometimes that works, but before you bring somebody, just make sure you have something signed up. And that I'll talk about it now. Make sure that the person that's signing the listing is the owner. You laugh. You'd be surprised. Seriously, there are tenants who have tried that, who have, said, oh yeah, it's my house. They think they're going to get away with it. But it's simple enough to check not only with tax records, but the title company, and there's RPR that you could do through our MLS, if under the tab that's there that, you get the Instanet and all of that. It's the resource tabs. There's RPR, which tells you a lot of information. And if you're not familiar with it, just go in there and it'll tell you how to sign on. And it's really simple to use, and it can be fun. One thing I do have to discuss, which is important, is the antitrust policies of the MLS. Just so you know, the MLS doesn't fix or control any of the compensation. Whatever the compensation is you're offering, that's up to your qualifying broker. And of course, the seller may have a say of that too, if so be it, because in the Code of Ethics, the seller actually is supposed to know how the brokerage fee is being split. They may care, they may not care. But do make sure that you understand that the MLS has nothing to do with that. They don't make any recommendations how to pay the cooperative broker. They're not allowed to do that either. They can't change any of the listings agreements. They can't say, oh, we're not taking that listing because it doesn't meet our minimum price. They must accept what, if you're a member of the MLS, of course, they must accept that. They can't tell you what type of listing to take. There are some that we do not take, but those are not per se listings, and we'll get into that, and it'll make more sense when we get there. It can't say to you, you must have an exclusive right to sell. Exclusive agency can go in if that's the type of listing that you and your QB, if you're not the QB, decide to take. Office exclusives, is everybody familiar with that? That's where it's in the office, but not in the MLS, and there's a waiver form that we have. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment because that's real important when we talk about the waivers. You should be well aware of something if you're not already. It doesn't give you a blanket deal to go directly to any sellers, to talk directly with the seller. It was interesting, I don't know, was anybody at Ashley's meeting the other day? I don't know, Ashley Strauss-Martin. She made a point of saying if you're getting no cooperation whatsoever, you're a qualifying broker, and this has been a fact, can in fact, if you're never hearing back from the other broker or for whatever reason, contact the principals directly and say, what gives? Do you know that there's an offer presented? And obviously if they say, you're kidding, when? It was never presented. That's a whole different issue. But there's time constraints and no buyer should have to suffer. Now, interesting to that, she pointed something out which is true. The buyer can go right up to the seller, knock on the door if they're local and say, why didn't you respond to my offer? Then you're not breaking any rules. I mean, if you really want your buyer to go up, usually they'll probably say, well, why am I getting involved in this? I'd prefer not to be. But they can do that as a matter of fact. And while we're on that topic, I'll just say they can also, if you're in the middle of a negotiation and there's multiple offers, there is nothing to stop the buyer, if the seller is local, or they can reach him, from going up to that seller and saying, what do I need to do to get your house? I'll tell my broker to write the contract that way. And we can't control buyers and sellers, they're principals. We can only control our own behavior. But I just wanted you to be aware that that can happen, and I'm sure it has. It doesn't establish relationships of the parties, whether you're a landlord or tenant. The MLS cannot do that. It doesn't discourage cooperation. It actually encourages cooperation. And it has nothing to do with politics, so it doesn't get into political activities whatsoever, nor does it affect anybody with the what your status is as a licensee. So that's part of the antitrust that I'm required to cover because it's important, because everybody knows about the antitrust rules when you're getting your license, how those all work, and so you have to be real careful that you don't violate those because the federal government can crack down very seriously. Our service is what would basically be described as, when I say mandatory, do all listings have to go into the MLS here? No, that's what the waiver form is for. But short of that, we need to put our listings into the MLS. So when you take a listing, it gives you a couple of days to put it into the MLS, business days that is, and then the information is disseminated out to the membership. You have to be a member of the MLS, of course, to use the service, and you have to be current with your dues and not be in violation of any fees or fines or any of that to be able to put the properties in the MLS. One thing is that since most people here, I guess, will be working under a qualifying broker, as you know, the listings are owned by the qualifying broker, and should you leave your qualifying broker and they say, we don't want you to take the listing, they can do that. But if your principal says, I wanted to stay with so-and-so, you know, the broker, usually the QB, if the principal says yes, let it go. I've never heard of a qualifying broker, if it's not sold yet, saying, no, sure, you can't take that listing with you, provided you're still here in Santa Fe. One of the requirements they have, which needs to be pointed out, they do request, or require, I should say, at least one photo for commercial and residential property. So do be careful and get a nice photo, but no signs or logos. We'll get into that again. But it has to be, probably a good photo of the property. Your principal can't really say, I don't want a photo. Now, what can I say? Some people like to take a picture of a sunset. I mean, that doesn't do much for selling the house as far as I'm concerned, but it should be a photo of the property, whether it's an interior shot or not an interior shot. And the good part about not having this manual today is because I do jump around, because it is not set up in the order that I would prefer it to be. So speaking of photos, I think you're all aware that when you take a photo of the property, if it's the owner occupying the property, there's no issue with that. But if it's a tenant in the property, I will strongly urge everybody to get a sign-off from the tenant that you can disseminate the photos onto the internet as well as into the MLS, and be sure that you're covered. It was not, and I tell these stories and they're true. I don't make anything up. I don't. And one of the things is that in our own company a number of years back, the tenant said, go ahead and take all the photos you want. I don't care. Well, the photos went up on the internet and a lawsuit came that their privacy was violated. They thought the photo was only going into MLS. They had no idea that it was going to be disseminated worldwide on the internet with all their personal possessions before everybody. And, well, it was settled, and the person did pretty well. The complainant actually, I don't know the exact figure, but it wasn't six figures, but it was in the five-figure range. And I just want to point out that it's so simple to get people to sign off, and it wouldn't hurt to say, is there anything you do not wish me to photograph? And then you're clear, and then you're safe, and granted, anybody can file any kind of lawsuit, but at least chances are it wouldn't prevail in court. And in this case, I understood that the insurance company for our errors and omissions covered that, but nevertheless, nobody wants to be told that they're being sued. It's just simple as that. Other type of listings that we haven't discussed are net listings, which we cannot take. And net listings is simply that if you take a property, you tell the owner, I'll get you $700, and then you sell it for $850, that you keep $150,000. And there's a good I don't have to tell you why. That doesn't sound too cool. Auction listings. For a while they took them, but you can't be guaranteed getting paid. Part of the MLS, you're supposed to get paid. And we'll discuss that as well, and it also talks about the waivers. So, I said I would talk about waiver listings. When it's on waiver, it means it's not in the MLS. It also means something else, that unless you work for that particular company, we'll use Santa Fe Properties. So at Santa Fe Properties, if I sell a waiver listing, I work for Santa Fe Properties, it's kind of an office exclusive, I will get paid whatever the compensation I find out it is. But if I'm working for Sotheby's, or let's just say I sell a Sotheby's listing and it's on waiver, and I don't have one of these wonderful things, this form from Random. I don't remember numbers well, it's 1108, and that tells you you're going to get paid. And you need that, because without it, they don't have to pay you because there's no offer of compensation. And when you get this form signed, the associate broker, is not the one who signs it. The qualifying broker must sign it. And that is because they're the ones who run the company. And you want to make sure you know what the compensation is before you show it, because they could say, oh yes, you're going to be compensated, and you may think, oh, I'm going to get probably X amount of dollars out of this, or percentage. You don't know that, because it could close and they could say, oh, your check for $500 is, I'll send it to your office for your cooperation on the $1.8 million property that you sold. And it actually, this is a long time ago, in the 90s, it actually did happen on an expensive property on a company I'd worked for, and the QB asked me, how could this be? Because at that time I was chairing MLS, I was on MLS committee, I don't know, every year, but they didn't have a proper compensation agreement. So this also means that if you're the listing broker and you want to be really nice, and I hope everybody's nice, but if you really want to do the right thing, and the broker from Albuquerque says, I have this perfect buyer for your listing in La Cienega, And you ask them, of course, and they say, can you show it to me? I'm not a member of your MLS. You want to be nice to them and fair, you say, we're going to need a compensation agreement signed by my QB in order for you to get paid if in fact your customer buys the property. Because if you're not a member of the MLS, you're not offered any compensation. You have to be a member of the MLS. And I repeat this many times because too many times people get stiffed when they sell. It doesn't matter what property it is, you still work through it. And going to arbitration is not going to help you because there's no offer of compensation unless you're a member of that MLS. And speaking of which, read what the compensation is. You may not want to work on a property that doesn't offer you what you think you're worth. I have seen them very low over the years with the compensation. We're not talking about just bank-owned. We're talking about, in general, what the compensation being offered is. So I always like to make sure everybody remembers this wonderful form that we have. And just on the same note, it's really a great idea. Go through the whole forms library when you have a chance. It's, you know, through the internet, there's a thing that says complete library. It's really, when you see some of the information sheets, they don't always tell us all the time. I know you get the random news, but it doesn't always, or it's sometimes hidden in there, what new forms have come up. And sometimes they do change, and always look at the dates and make sure you're using a recent form and that you didn't have one in your, that you printed out a year ago, because they change over a period of time. Are there any questions of anything so far? Okay. And I'm just going to hit really quickly, if somebody is expelled or suspended from the MLS, the seller doesn't necessarily get punished for that. It will still stay in MLS. Usually I say a QB usually will not be expelled. There's usually a member who just doesn't pay the dues. Most QBs want to make sure they're up on their MLS fees. You know, maybe if they're an independent QB, they might. But for the most part, you have to have everything current, and you can't owe any fees. And they give you 30 days to pay it after the due date. It's not like that awful, but they do send you a letter letting you know that you're about to be chucked out of the MLS. Now, in most instances, if you're not a member of the MLS and your office is, your QB will push you well and send you on your way with your license, or send it back, I should say, because you have to be part of the MLS if your office is. You can't, you know, for the local one. I mean, you don't have to, if you want to join Las Cruces, that's a whole different thing, if you're going to be working down there as well. Also important are dates. We spoke about when you enter the listing, same thing when that changed to pending, and now pending and pending please show are now non-active. They used to, pending show used to be an active category, but now it's probably where it should be so that you can go in there. But don't think you shouldn't check pending please show, because when you go into the MLS, if you hit the pending and you see please show, I'm just going to say call the listing broker. If you think, oh, that house, I remember seeing it on tour, would be so perfect, you can call the listing broker. And I will tell you, this happened 4 months ago. I called the listing broker on a property that I had shown a long time ago, and it was on the market for 3 years, and it had gone pending, and my buyer finally said, boy, I wish that house was still available. I called the listing broker, and the listing broker said, I can't believe you called. We're going to sign a termination this afternoon. And honestly, I wrote up the offer and it closed. And so don't just discard those. If you think your buyer would like it and it says please show, call the listing broker. They may say, oh, actually I should have changed it, it's actually closing in 4 days. That's a whole different thing. But I just wanted to tell you not to ignore those. And again, I stress certain things. Always read what the compensation is, to make sure that that's what you want to work for. Because if there is, and we're not doing procuring course today, but if for some reason something goes amok that you are supposed to get paid, there is an arbitration procedure. And you know, I didn't get into this now. I do, just so you know, I chair pro standards, both state and local. So I'm well aware of what happens when things have to go to arbitration. That's for money. There's also mediation, and of course there's ethics. But we're not doing that today. Sometimes you hear that and it is, the MLS, all the information is copyright. So under the copyright, You may think, well, how do I share that information? Yes, you can. If you have a specific client or customer, you may share listings with them. That's the whole purpose of the MLS. What can't you do? You can't print out all the listings in an area and make your own little MLS book and hand it out at the shopping mall. That would be, because those people are not your clients or customers, that would be a violation of copyright. That's the best example I could give, because I really doubt anybody is really going to be doing that. And though you don't get in trouble if you have a friend in Seattle and you think, oh, this reminds me of their house, and you send it up to them and say, doesn't this look just like your house? Because keep in mind, as crazy as it sounds, anybody can go into Zillow or any of those sites, or even Realtor.com, and really get the same information. It's just a matter of how you handle it, which is where it comes down to whether you're in violation of copyright. We talked about putting in the new listings 2 business days. If you don't, it's a $25 fine, and all the fines come with gross receipts tax, which is approximately here 8.4% these days. Don't correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know, it changes every year. Correct area, that's real important too. Now, if there's a mistake in area, or anything else that you see that might be incorrect, I always just go into where it says correction tab on the top, and Aggie will get the information. No, you don't get anybody fined, they get a warning. This association has, over the years, kind of changed. They figured, well, we'll just give someone a warning so they know that they need to correct it, or it will be corrected, whatever. But you're not doing anything mean. First of all, it's confidential. Aggie will know who complained, but I mean, she's not going to call up the other broker and say, so-and-so has complained. You know, you need to fix this. But it's, because sometimes it's either, let's say it's a staff member. I'm not picking on these, administrative people, but they hit area 4 and they meant to hit 14. But they got interrupted, whatever, and they accidentally didn't put the 14 in. It's usually, or sometimes I call the broker directly. If it's something I'm going to show, but I had a question, I'll say, and by the way, you need to fix the area. And most of the time, what do you think they say? Thank you. I would hate to have it in an obscure location. So just make sure it's in there, because that's a $100 fine. There is a whole schedule of fines. Like I said, we don't have this printed today, but there is one. You can get it online. The tax RD hyperlink, that just gives you the tax information on the property. And don't judge by, it doesn't hurt to do it, but don't judge by that who owns the property. Our tax department isn't 100% up to date. So if somebody bought the property and is flipping it, and somebody bought it and now is reselling it for whatever reason, it may not have the accurate person. It's best to call the broker, of course, or if you can't reach them, the title company, if you need to know who the actual owner is. And that's only in properties that are in the jurisdiction of Santa Fe County that you need the hyperlink. So I just wanted to make sure that if you're in a different county, let's say in Rio Arriba, San Miguel, that is not a requirement. Same thing with change of price, 2 days. You get to change the price or any terms that have to be changed on the property. And that's, again, business days. So don't get fined. It's very rare now that there's fine that I understand going out, but because most people are complying. There hasn't been too many issues with that. Very important is when it sells, so you have to put the sold form in. And the sold form has to have the right price and the right broker that sold it. So same thing when you get a listing, and you know that it's, if you don't put it in yourself, but the staff does, go into the listing and then check it and make sure it's accurate. Because I have seen things, and I'm saying sometimes people get interrupted. What if they leave a 0 off on the price, or add a 0, which is more common? And then you go, what? I don't have $1 million property over there, and then you have to get it fixed. At least you can go in, and everybody knows to go into maintenance. You can do it yourself. You don't have to bug the office. And I don't know if you're aware of this, because sometimes you have the office staff do your listings. But if you go into the maintenance and go into your listing and you decide after a few days or a week that you don't like the way the description reads, you can go in and play around with it and change it. Just remember to hit the save button, or it won't save it. So you have to always make sure you hit all the right things to save it. There are a few steps in our system. Paragon likes clicks. And when here we go again, I was also chairing the committee that got us not into Paragon, that was the board of directors, but I was on the technology group that kind of designed it, and we couldn't get Paragon. They just said, no, we found out that people like to click. So Rapatoni, our former one, didn't have so many clicks, but the current one, they like to have you click on stuff to be sure that you know what you're doing and that's what you really wanted. So just do what they ask. All listings have to have termination dates in our association. Remember, if it's about to expire, remember to get that expiration renewed. Now, I know it says you're supposed to like redo the whole listing from day one if it expires. Well, truthfully, that isn't really so necessary because no one's going to beat you. I mean, if it's 3 months away, yes, you need to do a new listing. But if it's something a few days, but if you're the representing the buyer, you want to look at that date, and if you see that the expiration date is 48 hours away, and your buyer says, let's write a contract, you may not get the contract in time before it expires to get paid. So what do? You call a listing broker, I mean, if you're nice, and you say to the listing broker, are you renewing the listing? They might say, well, actually, could you probably get it in to me in 24 hours because I understood they're relisting with ABC company? Or they might just say, no, the owner decided to sell it by owner. And you know how that'll go if your buyer says, let's drive by that house tonight and see. And they see for sale by owner in front, they're not going to be talking to you. They'll knock on the door probably. So do make sure you check that out. And we talked about that, the MLS has no control of really anything except that you comply with these rules and regs that they establish. And so do try and do your best to take care of all of that. Now, most of you probably aren't aware, or maybe you are, about mobile homes and manufactured homes. Those come with a motor vehicle department registration. And once they're a mobile home, they really are always a mobile home. They just don't become, even when the wheels are taken off. They may not be mobile, but their classification stays that way. Do be sure that you know that what it is that you're selling. Because it does come with a $100 fine if you misrepresent mobile homes. There was a period of time, I don't remember all the dates, probably it was about 12, 15 years ago, that people were going out, let's say Pewaukee, and it said single-family home, and the broker said, well, it is, only one family lives there. But that was not what it was represented to be. It's they'd get up there and the buyer would look and say, we came up here to see this. One other thing you're going to love, this is what happens when you're doing this so long. I'll use an example in Pecos from a while back. I was showing a property, and we get into this room in the middle of the house, and there was no question in my mind that someone built a stick house around a mobile home. So it was right in the middle. Now, it was represented as just a single-family home, but how does that affect anybody? It does for the appraiser, just so you know. It may look perfectly, there was no question that they built the house around a mobile home. It was cute, but you have to know what you're selling. I always tell everybody that. And most important, you can't take a listing and say, ready to be shown in 5 days. It has to be ready to be shown the day it hits the MLS. So just keep that in mind as well. Again, what if it isn't ready? The waiver form. And the waiver form does not control the lock boxes and the signs. It just controls MLS. So you want to put it on waiver with your seller's approval. And remember, in the random docs, there's a form discussing, which you should always give a seller if you have it on waiver. It basically tells them what they're losing by not using our MLS service. And it protects you, because what if the seller comes back and after a month has it on waiver and says, we've hardly had any showings, and then you explain, well, you put it on waiver. Well, you didn't really explain that well to me. You want to make sure that you're always covered, and we have all these wonderful forms that the Forms Committee puts together in order to protect everybody. So just be sure that it is available to be shown when it is supposed to be.
Okay, I have a question
Sure.
on waivers. Is the rule is it has to be to SFAR within 48 hours of signature on the waiver form or on the date that the listing agreement is signed?
When you get the signatures, is how I understand it would be.
What date do they go by? Do you know?
Oh, it depends on the situation. I have to be frank with you. Okay, it's a good question, because the date of the listing is the day the listing actually takes effect, even though you may not have all the signatures, but I say you should. Because let's say there's 3 owners and 2 of the 3 sign the listing form and 1 doesn't. Number 1, that third person that didn't sign it isn't bound to pay the brokerage fee. Okay? Only the ones that signed it did. What else? What if that third person, just to tell you this sounds scary, but it's true, had no idea that their sister and brother was selling mom and dad's house? You know, all of a sudden it's news to them. Okay? What they used to do here was when people used the snail mail, the postmark was what was used. But they're not out here to get you, to find you at this association. If you can show that you made every diligent effort, and you know, emails come with dates on them and everything, and you know, if you use Authentisign, it has a date, that's the safest way to go by it. Yeah, that's how I would view it. Sometimes they might be, you know, so to speak, if 2 out of 3 signed it on the 1st, and the last person signed it on the 8th because they were traveling, personally, I would think the 8th would suffice, and I think that would probably work here as well. In the meantime, you could always get a waiver signed by the other 2 and say, just for protection, but I just want to let everyone know that they're not out here to collect money for fines. That is not the purpose of the association ever. So they usually give warnings, they usually try to work with everybody and make sure that nobody has to pay fines, because that's not what the MLS is here for. Do remember, though, that there's information that's considered to be private. You don't put gate codes in the body of where it says MLS description. Don't ever put the properties vacant. That's for security issues, and we'll talk about that. Hopefully there'll be time. Just make sure no phone numbers, nothing that's personal goes in there. Under agent-only remarks, that's where you can put it. Personally, I wouldn't put a gate code either, because what if the person who's the broker prints out the agent-only page instead of the customer-only? And somehow someone in the association goes to an open house, and that's the one they printed. And they go, our gate code is being given out to everybody that comes through here. Ain't going to be a good day. So I'm saying I'd put call listing office for gate code. And I think that's the safest way to make sure everybody's secure and nobody gets hurt. Again, we talked about how it gets, if you don't send in the sold form in a timely manner, okay, again, within 2 business days, everything is 2 business days, that'll make it simple. There's an original fine of $25, but then it gets really nasty, and you know, if it's not corrected, then the fine goes up, and it goes to $100 to the second offense, and they go by how often you've done it. Third offense is $250, and it stays there. So years ago, people used to put $1 and 0, and you'd say, well, why would they do that? Oh, the seller didn't want me to tell anybody what the property sold for. But once the seller authorizes the MLS, they're authorizing you to disseminate the information about what the sales price is. If for whatever reason they say, I don't want the public to have any idea what I sold my house for, then you put it on waiver. Speaking of waivers, because I mentioned this form earlier, I meant to mention one other thing. That is, when you have it on waiver, and you go onto your internet and it says, you know, fabulous property on waiver, and you look at it and let's say it's $1.2 million, and you think, wow, I have the perfect buyer for that house. And here it is offered on, you still need to get this form signed. Don't run over and show the house, because it may have a lockbox, it may have a sign, but you may not get paid. And I'll just say I've asked, but they decided against it. I felt if people did that, this is a personal thing, puts this on the MLS that they have a property on waiver, I always said they should have this form attached to that email blast, just to remind everyone, but they decided, the MLS committee gets to make that decision, they decided not to do that. But I tell everybody in these classes to make sure that they remember to get the compensation form signed before they go running around to show the property. I know, we all think, oh, we're doing our buyers and sellers a great big favor, finding them their home, but you have to do yourself the great big favor and have a career and get paid. I always say I wish everybody has a high tax bill, because that means you're making a fortune. Really. So don't not report the sales prices. As I say, it even goes up further if they find out that you're not reporting it or you do an incorrect price. It even goes up higher to $1,000 for each instance that you're violating it. And of course, if you don't pay those fees, then you're out of the MLS. But just make sure your sellers know up front that you're going to be reporting the sales price. And once again, I know I've said it before, and also make sure they know if there's photographers coming, that they're aware that if there's something they don't want in the photograph, they may have an original, I don't know, Matisse hanging on the wall. They don't want the world to know they have all this artwork in the house. They can either take it down and pack it up and put it in a safe place, or they can tell you not to put it there. And then they have a catch-all here. If anything they forgot to tell you you're getting fined for, they have a $100 fine. If that's if for some reason they didn't remember something. I think they remembered everything, because I can't think of anything that they missed. Remember, you have to still comply with the Code of Ethics. Article 16 says you can't go up to somebody else's customer and start asking questions. If you feel you're being ignored, that's for your QB to take that under their control in order to find out why we're not hearing anything back at all, no communication from the seller or the buyer. Now, if you have a situation, this is, again, just coming from me, not from the booklet, and you really cannot find your seller. I've had that happen, where they just suddenly forget to tell me, well, not, or it's bad, maybe something bad happened, they had to leave town. And I'm like, this is crazy, I can't find the seller. I call the broker regularly and say, I'm still working on it. I don't know where this person is. I don't know what's going on. And sometimes, which is even more horrible, is people wire in their earnest money, or they're supposed to, and the title company says, we still don't have it. And you call the buyer, and the buyer doesn't respond. Now, what does that mean? Yeah, they could be flaky. 2, maybe they did send it, but the wire went amok somewhere, or something wasn't done right at their bank, and then they thought, oh, we sent our earnest money. Before we do inspections, let's go to the beach. Let's relax, let's not do anything. And, but today we all have emails and texts, and I don't even know where you are these days where you can't get in touch with someone, but it could happen, or something tragic could have happened. But you do have to check on all these things.